so much. I love you so much. I love you so much. I love you so much.
Hello, all you positive heads out there. Thanks for tuning your beautiful brainwaves into another episode of the Positive Head Podcast, where we are firmly convinced that creating success and happiness is rooted in understanding the ultimate nature of reality. And the fact that as human beings, we are all immensely powerful fractals of the one and only source consciousness, which creates and animates all things. Now, of course, understanding this powerful truth is one thing. Applying this incredibly empowering wisdom to everyday life, well, that's another. Which is exactly why we provide you with a fresh serving of soul food for thought 5 days a week. To help constantly remind you of what matters most. You are it. And I'm your host for the day, Erica Middlemiss. I am just another reflection and extension of you who will be here filling in for our beloved host, Brandon Beecham, leading the way to ensure your perspective is consistently expanded, your vibration is constantly elevated, and your heart is overflowing and full. All right, all you positive heads, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me on this terrific Tuesday.
Terrific.
It's very terrific. Obviously, I'm not alone today, y'all. I'm very excited to say I am not flying solo. I invited my fiancé, Bryan Anthony, to be here with me today. And here he is.
Hello, Positive Head Posse.
Oh my God.
How are you?
Don't make me regret this, Brian. Jesus. I don't know, y'all. I'm already starting to think, is this the best idea today? It sure is. It is for a reason. I don't know what that reason is. I do know, though, that I woke up again today at 4:44. So it's a great day. It's an angelic day.
It is an angelic day. Did you know that there is a lunar eclipse going on right now as we speak?
I did not.
Oh, snap. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're recording at an auspicious time.
Oh.
Yeah.
How lovely.
So there's all kinds of awesome things going on.
Well, very neat. And the thing about an eclipse, well, never mind.
What about an eclipse? Tell us.
Well, I was thinking that there was silence in an eclipse.
Yeah. I mean, there is kind of a sense of silence with an eclipse, right? You know, there's like,
right,
especially the solar eclipse, which is where we met, right? The solar eclipse of 2017. There was kind of like, it was an interesting sense of silence.
Right. And I think
the apex of that.
I think that's what I was just thinking about. I just wasn't sure if that was a correct thought. So I wanted to let it go, but I'm glad you're agreeing with me. That
yeah. That's what I'm here for.
there is silence in the, well, and the reason why I was asking that is because today we're going to talk all about the power and the beauty of silence. Mm-hmm. And that's the reason why I wanted to bring Bryan here today, because in his work that he does, he really utilizes silence in a lot of different ways. And it's beautiful when he does it. So I thought it would be important to bring him on and we could talk a little bit about, you know, all the different aspects of what you do with the silence. And I work with silence in my practice a lot as well. Mm-hmm. In my practice, I just shut up and listen. So that's where the silence is really effective in my practice, because you can't listen unless you're silent.
Absolutely.
But with you, something different happens in the silence. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can. So I am a sound healing practitioner. I'm also a musician, and I'm also a vocal empowerment coach. And when you first hear that, you might say, well, that's all sound related. Where's the silence in that? And I'll say that in response to that is that I have found that silence is actually probably one of the most important aspects of all of those practices, as well as the other spiritual practices that I do around those practices. And I'll start by saying I went to a sound healing academy called the Tamado Academy of Sound, Color, and Movement. And this was founded by one of the founding fathers of vibrational sound therapy. His name is Fabien Maman. He actually brought a lot of what we know as sound therapy and sound healing practices to the United States back in the early to late 80s. And he's originally from France. He's the one who introduced the tuning fork methods that we probably have seen or know of in the States. And I'm really fortunate to have studied with him. He was all about utilizing silence as a part of his sound healing practice. And to him, sound as a healing tool is very subtle. So he would look at sound and vibration as having a lot of power packed into, not a lot of, say, volume or dynamics. So when we would do something similar to what maybe you might have experienced or have heard of, is called like a sound bath or a sound meditation, his version of that is very, very subtle. It's using elemental sounds with a lot of spaciousness and silence in between, like barely audible sounds, really. And when you experience this for the first time, especially if you've been experienced to working with sound in other ways, you might kind of be sitting there being like, what is this supposed to be doing for me? Because I can barely hear the sounds. There's all this space in between. I hear my mind chattering in between. I don't like that, But after doing a few of those particular types of, they're called Tomado harmonizations, there's a really profound thing that you find happens in that, in that spaciousness, in that silence. And so he taught me, he was the one who really instilled in me the importance. And he actually had this really cool story because his whole journey into sound healing began with a story that centered around silence. Before he became a sound healing practitioner, he was actually a world touring jazz guitarist. So he's really well known, and they went on a tour to Japan, and him and his band it was all of their first time to Japan, and they started playing their set. And after the first song, they paused and waited for what they would normally be an applause afterwards, and nothing. Like the whole crowd was silent. And Fabien describes this as being like kind of jarring at first, and the musicians all kind of look at each other, but they're also world touring musicians, so they're like, all right, we'll just roll with it. So they went into the next piece, silence after that. So there was silence after everything. And what happened is that Fabien started to notice what was happening in that silence. He was starting to see that at the end of each song, he could see the feeling and the reverberation of the story they just told within that song, like floating through the crowd. He started picking up on like the more subtle, energetic things that were going on in that silence after each song, and he could see that it was making a deeper impact. And this makes sense because the Japanese culture has a lot of that silence in it. They have a really deeply rooted sense of like emotion, but it's not necessarily always outwardly expressed, at least not like a traditional sense, that traditionally but in kind of some studies of older Japanese culture, they were always revered as having like a real deep emotional, like an emotional depth that really had to be seen from those who were close to them or in that culture. And I think that came out in this concert that they were doing. And so when he told this story, it was really cool because it totally turned on his like second sensory awareness of sound, because he was seeing the energetic dynamics that were at work with the music that he wouldn't have otherwise seen. I mean, he felt it as a musician, and he had been to the point where obviously him and his musician friends were in like a flow state, right? And they, he felt that type of energy when it came to music, but that was a whole nother dynamic that was all gifted to him through the gift of silence. And at the end of that concert is when they did the applause. So they did the applause at the very, very end, basically. So yeah, just an interesting story that impacted me when I studied him, and it really solidified that understanding along with experiencing it myself. When I got back home from Switzerland, when we were studying that first year, I started, because I would go to open mics a lot, and I started asking the crowd to be silent after my song that I would share, or songs, just to like experiment with it. And really awesome. I mean, so for some people it was like really kind of strange, they're like, really, like you could tell they're like, there's just like this urge. They want to like have sound after the song. And they're like trying really hard not to clap. They're like convulsing, like trying not to clap. But, so it's just, I feel like I could probably keep going on. I mean, there's other aspects about, silence that are part of my practice, but I think I'd like to pause and see, if there's any thoughts that have come up about what that stirred in you, and when I was describing that particular story, that experience.
Well, what I was thinking about actually was every time I've done a sound experience with you, what I find is that when you're making a sound, whether it's with the drum or another instrument, that there's typically a visualization that is going through my head at that time when you're making the sound. And then when you're done making sound and you allow that silent space in between, what I noticed then is an integration of the visuals that I was having. And I think that without that silence, you don't do the integration. So it's like you move on to the next visualization without kind of processing what you just saw. And that to me says the silence is hella important.
Hella important.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think and you can look at a lot of different practices that incorporate some sense of silence, really. I mean, when you look at something like yoga, like I've heard yoga instructors say that Shavasana, which is the last part where you're lying down and you're in stillness, is the most important part of the practice.
I agree.
And there was another one that I was that had kind of come and gone, but I'll probably come back to it. But in sound healing and sound therapy, especially when you go to like a sound bath, I found that a lot of times in that community, there's just kind of a notion where people feel like they have to keep things moving and kind of keep a constant flow of sound going. And while that does have its own particular medicine, its own particular experience, I personally like, and I got this from my teacher, Fabian, and I've continued it because I really resonated with it. I personally like in my meditations and in my individual practice, leaving spaciousness in between each kind of soundscape. So sometimes I might soundscape with a couple of different instruments going into the other that are of similar quality. But typically I like to give a little bit of silence after each instrument because it's kind of an experience, a little mini story that instrument is speaking. It's a little, it can bring up particular visions. It can bring up particular sensations or even a particular sense of healing and integration based off of that one instrument or set of instruments. And so I like to give a little bit of silence after each section in order to allow that individual medicine to kind of to sink in and do like what you were saying. And you can do a sound meditation where you're just moving through sound the whole time and then leaving spaciousness at the end. And there's benefit in that. But the profound thing about silence that I've found is to dovetail on what you said is that, the other practice I was going to bring up was, I've studied or taken some courses on the 5 rhythms. It's like an ecstatic dance practice. And And also I used to go to something that we called Soul Shake or Dance Church. It was an ecstatic dance that we did on every Sunday that was based on that practice, started by a woman named Jasia in Chico, California. And at the end of the Soul Shake Dance Church, there was always a period of silence. And again, it's like you've just done all this crazy dancing and moving and sweating and, you know, even sometimes some cathartic like vocal release. And then in that silence, it's like, whoa, that's when everything just sinks in. Like you feel, the more and more I would feel into it, the more I would feel what I would call like the reverberation, like the memory, the echo of all that stuff I just did, like sinking its way into my mind, into my cells, into the body, and really just like going exactly where it needs to. And that's what I have found in my sound healing practice, becomes the most potent aspect of the practice, because you can feel and see and experience the sound working its way into the parts of our body and our mind, our psyche, and going exactly where it needs to go in that silence. So what I'll say about what happens when you don't have that is, just like anything, there's a certain aspect of, even if you're experiencing something like a sound healing session where the sound might feel therapeutic, it can be enjoyable sensations, and there's a myriad of different feelings and reactions that you can have from the enjoyable and sometimes the not so enjoyable. And when there's not spaciousness left for that integration, sound is really powerful. And when it activates and catalyzes certain experiences, it can bring things to the surface. It can break loose aspects of our healing process, of our mind, of our emotions that might have been stuck. And without the opportunity to integrate in that silence, then that stuff can kind of just bubble up, and then we just walk out the building with it kind of bouncing around our energy field or our mind or whatever that is,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And silence does, that silence for integration does demand a little bit from us. And that's kind of something that I want to touch on in a little bit, is just the challenge that silence definitely offers, because we're as a society, we're not necessarily super stoked about being in silence.
No, we're not. Silence makes us uncomfortable. It can make us anxious. It can make us nervous.
Right.
That's one of the reasons in my practice that silence actually works, because when I'm asking someone all about themselves and they stop talking and I sit there silent, looking at them like, tell me more.
Absolutely.
They will tell me more, and I don't have to say a word. And usually it's in that uncomfortable silence where the juiciest bits come out.
Absolutely.
So, and silence in this way allows you to really listen, and you don't have to be working with someone one-on-one like a client. You can do this with your friends. When your friends need someone just to listen to, you don't have to say anything. You just need to sit there silent, because the best therapy can really be just somebody listening to you. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that, where people just say to me, wow, to have somebody listen to me for the last 2 hours is so therapeutic. Like, I can go home now. They didn't even do anything yet. But that alone, just having someone listen is amazingly therapeutic. Rumi said, listen to silence. It has so much to say. Mm-hmm. And it's in that silence too, where that's where we can hear our higher self. That's where we can hear our higher guidance. Like what you're talking about in your sound practice, when we sit in that silence afterwards, that's our higher self giving us messages. That's our internal guidance giving us those messages that we can't hear unless we are silent and we're listening. So actually, this morning, I was considering looking for a clip to play today. And I really didn't find one that I thought was super great. So I did not choose one. But what I did find was a YouTube clip of someone reading Carlos Castaneda's book, The Power of Silence. And I did notice that there are a couple books out there on the power of silence, and Carlos Castaneda is a oldie and goodie. And I thought to myself, I wonder if I even have that book, because I'm kind of this like book hoarder, if I'll confess about that. But I kind of collect books. I go to like estate sales and I like gather all these books, and I have a whole bookshelf of books I haven't even read yet, of books I've collected. And so I figured maybe I have this book, and what do you know, I do. And so I paged through it a little, and a little story in here that I like to read that has everything to do with how our higher self is trying to talk to us. The story says that once upon a time there was a man, an average man without any special attributes. He was, like everyone else, a conduit for the spirit. And by virtue of that, like everyone else, he was part of the spirit, part of the abstract, but he didn't know it. The world kept him so busy that he had neither the time nor the inclination really to examine the matter. The spirit tried, uselessly, to reveal their connection. Using an inner voice, the spirit disclosed its secrets, but the man was incapable of understanding the revelations. Naturally, he heard the inner voice, but he believed it to be his own feelings he was feeling and his own thoughts he was thinking. The spirit, in order to shake him out of his slumber, gave him 3 signs, 3 successive manifestations. The spirit physically crossed the man's path in the most obvious manner, but the man was oblivious to anything but his self-concern. So I think that that's a really good story to point out that when we're so caught up in the hustle and the bustle of our lives, and we're not taking the time to sit in silence and be quiet, that we aren't able to hear our messages that our higher self and our guides are trying to give us all the time. And they're constantly doing that. It's just, if we're not quiet, we can't hear them.
Absolutely. I think that's great. That's a wonderful little story that highlights such a perfect understanding of how important silence is. And, when we're talking about silence in this way, really we're just talking about creating more stillness and more spaciousness for the higher messages, the guidance that guides us in a way that is more profound. And I would say in my experience is 100% always for the better good of myself and everyone around us, right? And I do want to touch a little bit, because this just in the concept of silence being a extension or synonymous with what we would call the unknown, and just to briefly touch on something that Dr. Joe Dispenza says in a book that I've been reading called Becoming Supernatural. And that is, he talks about how the unknown is really where all of the potential lies, right? And I've been hearing several different speakers and teachers talk about this. But when we're talking about like manifestation, for example, right? Manifestation happens through an alignment with really the unknown, like creating a sense of faith that the universe and that our higher self and the higher powers that are really directing the play have the resources, have the vision, have the creativity available to curate like the best possible path for us. Mm-hmm. But what happens is, if we're like that person who's, receiving messages from spirit left and right, but we're so in our routine, we're so in our typical mindset, we're always, if we wake up, for example, like here's a typical day. I think Joe Dispenza talks about this like as a sequence. Like if we wake up and the first thing we do when we get out of bed is start thinking about something that had to do with yesterday, or we get on our phone and we start looking at Facebook, or we
Check our email.
Right, check our email, or even just going through like a regular routine. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with a regular routine, but if that regular routine causes us to constantly just think the same things each day as we wake up, we're not leaving any space for the unknown. We're only leaving space for what we have known, because our mind is focused on the known.
Right. Yeah. And I like this point, because with each day, you have the opportunity for a new beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Each and every day you wake up, you have infinite possibility at your fingertips to do with whatever you so choose. So every new dawn is a new beginning, or can be, if we're not cluttering our brains, our minds with all of the past and the old stories.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So to be able to take time in the morning and sit silently,
Mm-hmm.
one of my favorite things to do is do nothing in the morning, but sit outside in nature in complete silence, because that is very grounding, and it sets the tone for the day. Mother Teresa said, "We need to find God, and he cannot be found in noise and restlessness. God is the friend of silence. See how nature, trees, flowers, grass grows in silence. See the stars, the moon, and the sun, how they move in silence. We need silence to be able to touch souls."
Absolutely. I love that.
Mother Teresa.
Yeah,
right?
Mother Teresa's got the good stuff.
Right.
I got a interesting kind of, I hate the word download, but it was something interesting that came to me when you were reading that. And that is like going back to say like a sound practice, for example, like sound healing. And like when I, for example, am guiding my clients through using their voice as a therapeutic tool, like the first thing that we start doing is listening. And developing that sense of listening, being able to sit in stillness and quiet, and sense what's going on in the mind and in the body. Because what that does is that then allows that for the voice to express itself in a way that is in alignment with the most therapeutic benefit that's available, because we listen to what the body and what the mind might need in that way. And all I am doing is helping to open the vocal channel so that we're comfortable expressing our voice in several ways. But that stillness, that silence to listen to what's going on before we do that is really important. And I feel like that translates into all different aspects of our life, like what you're just talking about. So, if we create spaciousness in our day to have some moments of silence, or even a moment of silence for a few minutes, even the beginning of the day, like it actually provides a profound opportunity for us to have a little bit of a reset, and then also to create a platform for us to respond to life in a different way that is like more authentic and more in tune with what's probably best for like our higher path, right?
Sure. And probably more creative too.
Right.
Yeah. So another one of our favorites, Wayne Dyer,
Mm-hmm.
he said, "Everything that's created comes out of silence. Your thoughts emerge from the nothingness of silence. Your words come out of this void. Your very essence emerge from emptiness. All creativity requires some stillness." And, speaking of music, we can't have good music without silence, right?
Absolutely.
Like there's no anticipation, there's no drama when there's no silence in between the notes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a great point. Cause again, like what I kind of touched on, and what you're saying as well, is that silence provides that canvas from which arises that which we can experience oftentimes in a more full way. So to equate like a busy mind, like a life that doesn't have a lot of silence, to say music, it's like you always have a tune playing, right? And you just always have, and sometimes that happens. Like I know that sometimes I go throughout my day and I've got like music stuck in my head, and it feels, and with the chatter, and there's a correlation there too. Usually when I have songs stuck in my head, it's because I haven't sat in silence, or I haven't like allowed myself to reset. And so I've got thoughts, or I've got music. And I used to also just do that. And I'm guilty of it now. And it's interesting to see what happens especially as our society becomes more and more tied to our phones and we have so much access to distraction. It becomes harder and harder for us to actually sit in silence. It's like, I have that reaction just as much as probably any person or millennial or whatever, like, that, when I am in a place like waiting in line somewhere, or I have some sense of possible spaciousness, where I'm not necessarily, quote, doing anything, like the first thing I want to do is fill that space. Like I want to do something, right? And so this kind of leads into the concept of meditation, providing that sense of stillness and silence, and how you can create that sense of meditation really like anywhere. And so, I want to give you an opportunity to share about meditation, but I'll just say my experience about meditation, with meditation, is that yes, it is profoundly beneficial to create space, say in the morning or any time really throughout the day. The morning tends to be best time to have a reset for me, to sit in stillness with as much silence as possible. Obviously, we're not in a completely silent world, so there still might be sounds around us. But the idea of meditation in this way is we're not doing it to shut off our mind, but really just to give an opportunity for us to sit in the experience of the now and not have to do, and our mind might wander. We can bring it back by...
It will.
Right, of course, it always does. And we can bring it back by concentrating on the breath, or even concentrating on sensations in the body, or if there is sound around us, say if we're outside, concentrating on that, on the birds or the wind. Just being in the moment. That's an opportunity that, the silence there is bringing a sense of, there's just more spaciousness that you're bringing.
Yeah,
right?
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And while I think that the ultimate goal of meditation is to quiet your mind, I think that many of us don't just sit down and do that. I don't think any of us actually just sit down and quiet our minds. Most of us need something to do with our minds, but ultimately, once we practice, we can get to a place of some true quietness in our mind, and doing some of those techniques that you suggested, especially listening to the other sounds, that quiets the rest of your mind, right? But the whole point of being able to quiet your mind is so that you can listen to your higher self again, which for me is one of the biggest points of meditation, or not a point, but why I think it's so important to meditate, because not only are you being in the present moment, being at peace and bringing in loving energies, but this is the space where you learn to connect with these higher aspects of yourself that are helping you every single day in every moment. And when you can make those connections and listen in that silence, then you can do it not in that silence as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And so I think that leads into a challenge that I am going to offer all of you. And firstly, actually, the thing I want to offer is I want to offer you an opportunity to bring more silence and spaciousness into your life wherever you have that opportunity. And it can really be simple, especially because, again, going back to our modern way of being and being so distracted now, that really creating spaciousness and silence is actually more, I would say, in context of where we're at, there's a lot more possibility because we're so bombarded with stuff, that something as simple as, try this. Next time you get in the car to drive, let's say a short distance, try not playing the radio for that distance. Let's say it's a 10-minute drive. Just try doing that. You can breathe, you can obviously you want to keep an eye on the road and see what's going on there and just observe. And just see what that's like and see what comes up just in that space. Because in that space, you're not necessarily, super quiet, still on, in meditation, but you are still creating a certain amount of spaciousness for your mind to kind of to show you what's going on there and see what comes through. Right.
And also notice if you're bothered by that.
Exactly.
I know a lot of people really have a hard time with silence or things being quiet. Like they always need to have the television on or the radio play, something, right?
Absolutely.
And they get super uncomfortable, like, no, because they're not comfortable with their own thoughts. Yeah. So,
well, and I do want to actually, I wanted to say this before the end too, because I do want to honor and respect how difficult it can be. Because again, like equating silence to the unknown, like there's a lot of benefit that is available when we're talking about silence and the unknown, that creative and infinite potential that's before us. But that unknown can be very scary.
Absolutely.
To
very
people,
scary.
right? So, and I know, and I'll just share real quick that I had my first like real deep meditation experience was I did a 10-day Vipassana course, and this was like it was crazy because I mean it's you're in total silence for 10 days, and the first like couple of days that I was meditating, I was like appalled at my mind. Because I had never sat with just my mind for that long in silence. And I was like looking at my thoughts. Like there were these people that were sitting next to me that were making these interesting noises. And I was just like, I was getting like violently angry in my head, because of this like slight irritation. But it was so, I could see how augmented it was. And then after a couple of days, it started being comical. I'm like, oh my gosh, like my mind is really funny and crazy. I've got all these gremlins bouncing around. And then I started really seeing thoughts for what they are. Yeah. And that they actually don't really carry that much weight if I don't let them. Right.
Right.
So anyways, I just want to identify that because as we're doing this, if you do identify a sense of discomfort, and whether you're doing a drive or if you're standing in line, try not pulling out your phone. Just see what happens when you just stand in line. Because again, what you're doing is you're not in complete silence, but you're creating a little bit more silence. You're creating a little bit more spaciousness where there wasn't any. So meditation, of course, is going to be a great way to really get into as quiet a state as possible. And we can interject these a little bit more quiet, a little bit more silent opportunities throughout our day, like when we have that opportunity.
Yeah.
Right?
For sure.
So I believe that we're going to do a little challenge, a little opportunity. It's really, really simple. We're going to give you a little bit of silence here to sit in quiet. If you're driving, of course, be careful. Keep watching the road. This is going to be a very short silence because if we are on a podcast, and it's kind of a faux pas to have silence.
We just thought it would be a great idea to sit in silence, see really what it's like for 33 seconds to sit in complete silence and see what comes up, see what kind of ideas are rolling around or what is integrating from everything we just talked about.
Absolutely. Ooh, and I have an idea. If you are on the Positive Heads Facebook group, share your experience, share your 33-second silent experience.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, everyone.
Are we ready?
We'll see you in 33 seconds.
And we're back. I hope that 33 seconds offered some illuminating, interesting experience for you.
And I wonder, did you perceive it as long? Did you perceive it as short? It's going to be different for everyone.
Totally. Yeah, that's a good marker because if it felt long, then great. Like try a minute next time,
You mean short?
Well, no. I was right. No,
Were you though?
Yeah.
If it felt long, if it felt long, do it for longer.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
no.
Because
If it felt short.
I'm serious. No, you got to listen to me. Okay. All right. The reason is because like there's that saying where it's like if you like meditate for 20 minutes a day, unless you don't have time or unless you're too busy, then meditate for 40 minutes or meditate for an hour kind of thing. Right. Okay. So listen to me. If it felt long, the challenge is then to do it for a little bit longer. And if it felt short, then you're probably a meditation pro and you don't really need to do anything else ever.
Exactly. I'm sorry I left. That's a very good point.
No, you get it. Okay. So just to recap. All right. So, if the invitation is, if this is new to you, create little bits of time of silence for you to just sit in stillness. You don't necessarily doesn't need to be fancy. You don't need an altar. It is nice to have a meditation space, just wherever that might be. I mean, it doesn't have to be fancy, but like we've talked about this in a previous episode, like Erica goes outside. I've got a fancy altar. It's, there's kind of two different.
I have a fancy tree.
Yeah, exactly. She likes to be in nature. I love to be in nature too, but I like my space. But really, it's just creating that time, right?
Yeah.
And that time can compound on itself. And that's why if small bits of time are challenging, then you start small and you build up to it. If you feel like you really need a deep dive, if you're like a pro with the smaller bits of time, then really challenge yourself to go, a longer distance. So
that, and also speaking of smaller bits, even just in daily life, when you feel that there's a silence and you feel that you need to speak, try staying silent.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, just, you don't have to speak.
Mm-hmm. That's actually, I will say, is that's one of the hardest things for us to do, especially people
Very
who
hard.
are talkers. And that's actually been my experience as stepping into my own voice. Is I was like an over talker. I was like a conversation commando is what my friends in college called me. And I always had to just like fill that space. We all do it, because especially if there's a certain level of discomfort, and some of the greatest discomfort can come up when we're just interacting with other human beings, right? And it can feel awkward at first. However, it is actually really profound just to take a breath when we are feeling like we need to say something, but we feel like it's going to be not authentic. See what happens when we just kind of breathe, and if we're interacting with someone, like breathe and make some eye contact, and just allow them to kind of continue what they're saying or whatever. If we just take a moment to sit in some stillness, then we eliminate that necessity to fill that space.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. If you guys ever practice that eye gazing technique, it's actually just that you sit in silence and you look into the other person's eyes and you don't say a word. And pretty uncomfortable at first, but then you kind of get used to it, and it becomes this beautiful thing. And I'm not saying, go around and eye gaze at people all day. That's kind of creepy, but it's the thought of just, looking the other person in the eye and knowing that you don't have to say a word, that you can see the love that they are and that you are in that moment when you do that. And I think it allows for that silence to exist more comfortably.
Absolutely. Very last thing I'll say on the way out is I was doing a sound healing session last night for a yoga nidra class, and this still comes up with for me as a practitioner, and that is like I was invited there to do sound, right? And this is just an analogy to what we were just talking about. I was invited there to do sound, right? During the yoga, but yoga nidra is kind of like this. It's like a guided, like yogic sleep meditation thing, right? And so the facilitator is kind of talking for a little bit, guiding people into a relaxed state, and even talking about things like silence. And I'm there to do sound. And there was times where I knew that I either needed to, and I was doing very subtle sound the whole time, but there was times where I knew I needed to go into silence. Like I just needed to let the sound go. But there was that thing that came up in my head. Well, I'm here to do sound. I've only got X amount of minutes. Like I should be filling the space, right? And I had to consciously, I had to consciously say and listen, like this is a time for silence. And so that's another thing that is an awareness that we start cultivating with this, is that we start feeling, like when we really feel into our heart and our feeling center, like maybe this isn't the time to speak or say what we're like our mind is saying we have to fill the space with, and honor that and see what happens, because that actually brings us more into an alignment of who we really are, because we're not following what our mind says should be happening in that moment. We're sitting in our heart space at that point, and our heart space offers more of that creative flow from that canvas of silence. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's a really good note to end on today. Yeah. So we're going to leave you with a song today. I let Bryan pick. Bryan, what are we going to listen to?
We are going to be listening to Within the Silence by Mirage of Deep.
Awesome. Love you all. Till next time.
Much love. See you later.